This is the Tom Bigby Tales, and I'm your host, Shannon Evans. I write about a small town in northeast Mississippi called Columbus on the Tom Bigby River. Sometimes I write about the rest of the state. This episode is about the current downfall of the Columbus Cultural Heritage Foundation and the Tennessee Williams Birthplace. The Tennessee Williams Birthplace and Visitor Center officially reopened last night. Director Nancy Carpenter gave a welcome speech from the front porch. She thanked the mayor, the companies paid to do the shoddy renovation work, and Noetta's, who donated some flowers. What wasn't said was even more interesting. She did not mention they're broke and really need to be fundraising and not throwing a second party in less than a month. She mentions the Mississippi Department of Archives and History grant used to renovate the building and the alleged Heritage Hills grant. The grant she first told the city council was for $50,000, and the very next city council meeting, about a week to a week and a half later, had miraculously become worth $100,000. We still have seen zero press from Heritage Hills on such a generous grant. They usually don't give more than $20,000 or $30,000 grants, and almost always they are matching funding grants. And wouldn't an organization that magnanimous and giving such a large amount to a single benefactor and to such an important building as the Tennessee Williams Birthplace, an iconic Mississippi location, wouldn't they put out a press release or do a photo op with PR hungry Nancy Carpenter? I mean, last night, one of her dearest friends, per her Facebook post, had a medical emergency during the open house. Nancy walked over and spoke to her friend who was lying on the sidewalk, attended by concerned attendees in the crowd. Before the first responders even arrived, Carpenter tells a WCBI reporter she was ready for an interview, quote, by the welcome sign. Yes, she left her dear super senior friend before the friend was even in an ambulance to go do a TV interview by a damn welcome sign. This is reminiscent of her Facebooking to her friends while her now departed husband was having a serious medical crisis rather than call 911. Like I said, she would not have missed a PR opportunity for the Heritage Hills alleged $100,000 grant for something such as a medical emergency of a friend or a loved one. I mean, I call BS on that one. The building was dark and dreary, the Tennessee Williams building, and this was probably done to hide the less than professional interior work on the house. The plaster repairs are uneven and will probably crack as soon as the weather freezes and then gets hot again. The interior trim work and windows were not properly, if at all, scraped and sanded. The same for the outside before the new paint was added. It is already bubbling on the bottom of some of the door trim and baseboards. Every window and jib were painted shut. The wall paint does not go all the way to many of the door facings and baseboards, especially in the downstairs hall. The caulking inside and out is messy and looks like Nancy and her helpers applied it, not professional restoration contractors. No one should be surprised, as Carpenter truly is never one for paying attention to details and certainly has no understanding of accountability. What's most telling about last night is what was left unsaid. There was a $75,000 grant given to the Cultural Heritage Foundation by Miss Dixie Butler a few years ago, specifically for the commission of a life-size bronze statue of Tennessee Williams seated on a park bench, very similar in design to the one a Mississippi sculptor made for Oxford of William Faulkner. The same sculptor did it for the Tennessee Williams sculpture, and the mold is complete and has been sent for casting in Atlanta's Inferno Art Foundry. On August 23rd, I think, was when it left the artist's studio. The artist himself was at the grand reopening of the Tennessee Williams building last night, but absolutely no mention was made of the sculpture or the fortified reinforced bench for the statue that has yet to have money to purchase it. The artist was not mentioned, He was not recognized. He was not introduced. The statue was not mentioned either. How odd. It felt reminiscent of when the Tennessee Williams State Marker sign was supposed to be erected in front of Trustmark Bank to commemorate the hospital where Williams was born that once stood in that spot. At the time, $20,000 was raised via private donors for this sign. Actually, there were going to be two signs, but specifically for that sign. Carpenter, by that time, was the newly appointed CVB director and had been in charge of the monies there for at least 6 months at the point that they started fundraising. There was a grand photo made to celebrate the fundraising success published in the local paper, The Dispatch. The marker, however, was never ordered. The donors began to ask Carpenter about returning the dollars if no sign was to be made. First, she told them it would now cost more than $20,000. Unhappy with her response, the donors went directly to the CVB board that employed Carpenter. Carpenter could not produce a bank statement showing the dollars had been placed in the bank. She hemmed and hawed and claimed it must be a bank error. Then the treasurer and board president went to the bank. There was no error. The money was not there. President of the board, DeWitt Hicks, quietly made all donors whole, and the sign project was never spoken of in the press or in the CVB boardroom again until Tom Bigby Tales dug it up again last fall and asked questions on this podcast. Carpenter lied and responded that she was not the director at the time, which she actually had been for 6 months at the time of the missing monies. She lied. But Carpenter has a long history of overpromising, underdelivering, lying, and questionable unethical financial practices with public funds. You only have to listen to the podcast this platform has produced based on public records requests. She has gone on expensive New Year's holidays and non-work related Oxford motel stays in a $400 a night hotel on the CVB's credit card. Exorbitant cost overruns are common on every one of her marketing budgets. And how about having her blind husband on the payroll as her driver? Then there are her last-minute Elks building expenses last fall when she forgot to secure a venue for arts and antiques. Over $50,000 was sunk in that building that she had neglected for 10 previous years. You know, the one where she was going to build a $3 million children's museum with zero available parking. For 9 years, she talked about creating a children's museum and yet let the building rot because no one thought to budget more than $4,000 a year for maintenance for that building and the Musselwhite building combined. For 10 years, she made empty promises to her board and this town about the albatross on the hill called the Elks Club building. The roof rotted, the porch rotted, the roof leaked into the grand ballroom. The yard was overgrown, and rats, groundhogs, and nutria had taken up residence. And all the money donated and procured through grants wasted or misspent on that museum boondoggle. What became of the generous gift from the Phillips Garth Foundation? It was for the Children's Museum. Was it returned since no museum was ever developed? Then there was the $20,000 matching grant, which was what the CVB matched last year to make repairs to the building in preparation for arts and antiques, the last minute event. Clearly, it did not go to a children's museum. The CVB then spent $94,000 at one point on design work to the consulting firm Roto in Ohio to design and create a children's museum concept and drawings. I believe that was in 2017 or 2018. An additional $18,500 was spent on hiring a fundraising for projects consultant named Holly Wagner. Wagner was tasked with designing a plan for raising the $3 million needed to create the Children's Museum. In other words, capital fund raising. Her report, if ever completed, was never ever presented, and Carpenter even gave a no comment to the paper when asked about it. 10 years of empty promises and zero transparency resulted with the long-abandoned museum, which leads us back to Carpenter as director of the Tennessee Williams Welcome Center, where, as a nonprofit, there is zero transparency required of the organization except for 990 filings with the IRS. The foundation is broke. Every penny they allegedly have in grants this year is committed to pay for the recent renovation and so-called restoration work for the Tennessee Williams building. That's $140K approximately from Mississippi Department of Archives and History, $100,000 allegedly from the Heritage Hills, and $54,069.69 from the City of Columbus. That was the match share required for the MDAH grant to be awarded. But none of this is for operations or maintenance of the building in the current fiscal year starting October 1st. Carpenter and her Columbus Cultural Heritage Foundation board submitted a funding request to the CVB's board, the Columbus Visitors Bureau board, for a grant requesting $130,000 for this fiscal year, including salaries for Carpenter and her 3 part-time greeters at the Tennessee Williams Welcome Center. The CVB offered the Columbus Cultural Heritage Foundation $81,000 to cover the budgeted building maintenance items, but stated specific requirements of how the grant could and could not be spent. The grant was fairly standard as far as grants go, indicating none of the monies could be spent on salaries or anything beyond building maintenance and keeping the building open. It required invoicing practices, copies of bills and payments, and standard grant accounting practices of transparency. Additional conditions included use of the Tennessee Williams grounds and building for advertising and marketing purposes, something that is mutually beneficial for tourism purposes for both the foundation and the CVB. It also required the building be open for business on all scheduled business days in order to be funded that month. The last day possible, the Columbus Cultural Heritage Foundation Director Nancy Carpenter and their attorney returned the grant award contract as rejected. No discussion, no questions, no suggestions, just no thank you. The CVB then returned the earmarked funds held out for this grant to their general funds for distribution to future projects, events, and tourism grant applications. So the foundation is now getting desperate to find funding. Their attorney has been exploring how to get automatically included in the 2% funding interlocal agreement from the restaurant tax. That agreement is currently locked in for 10 years, with 8 years left in the current iteration. Even if the state legislature makes the foundation a recognized government entity, the current agreement cannot be changed for the next 8 years unless all members agree to change the interlocal agreement. That would mean the link, the Columbus City Council, which is made up of 6 or 7 councilmen and the mayor, the Lowndes County Board of Supervisors, another group of 6 people, and the CVB board, a group of 10 or 11 people, would have to meet individually, and their boards would have to each agree to amend the agreement. And some or all of them would have to agree to give Carpenter's organization a portion of their proceeds. It has to be unanimous. That is just not going to happen. Each group has earmarked their percentage of the 2% tax that they receive each year for specific tourism-based projects around the city and the county. The Welcome Center is a money-sucking, expensive ornament that is nice to have, but does not have any financially redeeming or generating qualities. It generates zero cash. Last week, the state auditor reported that visitor centers around the state were being extremely wasteful in their recent audit of their spending practices. and had little to no transparency, and he put them all on notice to take heed and to change. Apparently, the Columbus Cultural Heritage Foundation and Nancy Carpenter are not taking heed. They are furious the CVB expected accountability and transparency for their grant funding offer. Carpenter promised the city transparency and accountability for their award of the $54,000 matching grant for renovations. But that is yet to happen, and they got their money back in September. No reporting has been done so far. So how is the foundation paying their bills? Let's think about that. They recently hosted an expensive catered party in a private home, which is a lovely antebellum home, for MDAH and locals. And well, that was a couple of weeks ago. And it included custom party favors for the 16 MDAH guests, Prosecco for the crowd, and meat, cheese, and charcuterie, and hot dish hors d'oeuvres, and multiple floral arrangements. This week, the foundation, at their open house and the grand reopening, had a rather thin spread of petit fours, pecan sandies, divinity, a dish of raw pecans, and water at the grand reopening of their headquarters. The alarm guy was there today. Attorney fees, light and gas bill, insurance on the building, plus riders for the Dakin Cross and the organ, and of course, payroll. The only money she has is the city grant that has no real contract attached to it. She just gave a verbal agreement, and all those bills are coming due. She and her board have got to be panicking. MDOT is not going to fund them. The foundation turned down the 81K from the CVB. Where else can the foundation turn for fast cash? The link? No way they would support her. The city council? They are cash strapped and barely voted to give her the $54,000 the mayor promised her under duress. The board of supervisors? I'm not sure they can give her money because the foundation is a 501c3. And more importantly, why would any organization, especially the board of supervisors, give her money after she turned down $81,000 not even a month ago? It seems like the financial walls are finally closing in on her, and unfortunately, the foundation. They chose to get in bed with the devil, and now they are as culpable as she is. She can't even afford to close the Tennessee Williams Welcome Center because if she does, it reverts back to MDOT, and the foundation has to come up with $400,000 to pay MDOT back. That's in the courthouse and filed with the Chancellery Clerk in that agreement. There's also two recent memorandums of agreement and understanding that Carpenter signed, one in October of 2020 and the other in 2023, stating as a condition of accepting the MDAH grant, one for the porch in 2020 and one for the building in 2023, the Cultural Foundation, not the CVB, agrees to care for the building and its maintenance a minimum of 25 years, or it has to pay back every penny of those grants that they've recently gotten to MDAH. And the signature on those documents for my public records request to MDAH, Nancy Luke Carpenter. She is in a hell of a pickle financially right now. The bills are growing and collecting interest, and there's no money to pay them. When will her board recognize what a liability she is to their organization? When collection notices arrive? When a lien is tacked on the front door of the Welcome Center? I want to thank you for coming on my show tonight. I hope that you'll follow me on YouTube. And please like, subscribe, and comment there. And I'd also, if you prefer, please follow me wherever your podcast platform is of preference and leave a review there. Until next time, I'm Shannon Evans, and this is the Tom Bigby Tales.